picture this. It's January 2026. In the span of just a few weeks, the United States launches a lightning-fast raid in Caracas, and then turns around and tries to force Denmark to sell Greenland. Two huge crises, thousands of miles apart. You'd think they have nothing to do with each other, right? Well, you'd be wrong. They were two calculated moves in the same aggressive new global game, a game designed to completely reshape the Western Hemisphere.
And to really get your head around this massive escalation, you have to ask this one pretty unsettling question. Because the timing here was no accident. These two distant, seemingly random events are actually deeply connected by a single, incredibly audacious American strategy, one that's trying to literally redraw the map.
So, to understand this strategy, first, we gotta look at the new playbook they're running. It's this ideological framework that basically reboots one of America's oldest foreign policies and supercharges it for a new era of global competition. Okay, so legally, the official term is the Trump Corollary. The president, he calls it the Monroe Doctrine. But honestly, call it whatever you want. The meaning is crystal clear. The U.S. now considers direct control over physical assets in its hemisphere. We're talking oil, rare earth minerals, even just strategically important land, a national security imperative. And it's willing to act alone to get them. And look, this isn't just a small tweak. It's a radical evolution. The original Monroe Doctrine was all about political influence, telling Europe, hey, this is our backyard, you stay out. This new version is about ownership. It literally redefines a Chinese company investing in a mine as the same level of threat as a foreign army landing on a beach. And to deal with it, it prioritizes raw hard power way over diplomatic norms and alliances. All right, so that's the theory. Let's see how this doctrine actually played out on the ground, starting with the first move in the strategy, a sort of proof of concept that targeted the massive energy prize down in Venezuela. And just look at the speed here. This was not a slow diplomatic buildup. This was a blitz. You have a military operation on January 3rd, a public demand to buy an entire country on the 5th, and an economic attack on your own allies by the 17th. This was a rapid-fire sequence, and it was all part of one single plan. Publicly, the whole Venezuela operation was sold as a counter-drug mission. But the deeper, strategic reason, well, that was all about getting control of a very specific type of heavy crude oil that Venezuela has tons of. And it was also about proving to the world that the U.S. had the will to act. And this brings us to what's called the heavy crude paradox. It's kind of fascinating. See, America is an energy superpower. But its most advanced, multi-billion-dollar refineries on the Gulf Coast, they were specifically designed to process heavy, sour crude. They're actually not optimized for all the light, sweet oil that the U.S. produces. And the absolute perfect feedstock for these giant facilities? You guessed it, Venezuelan Orinoco crude. So the really crucial point here is that this operation wasn't just about getting oil for the U.S., it was about denying that same oil to its rivals. The goal was to completely dismantle the so-called shadow fleet of tankers that was sending 80% of Venezuela's oil straight to China. The idea was to starve Beijing of a key energy source while at the same time cutting off the subsidized oil that was propping up the Cuban regime. It was a two-for-one punch. So with the energy situation in the south now under control, the administration immediately pivoted 3,000 miles north to the second and, you could argue, much more ambitious part of its grand strategy. Just 48 hours after the raid in Caracas, the White House made its intentions perfectly clear. Now, this wasn't some casual, weird real estate idea like back in 2019. Oh no, this was a demand, and it was framed as a non-negotiable matter of national security. And the reason for all this urgency comes down to what you might call a strategic trifecta. First, you've got rare earth elements, which are absolutely essential for everything from F-35 fighter jets to our iPhones. Second, you have its geographic position, which is perfect for a new missile defense shield. And third, you have future control over the new Arctic shipping lanes that are opening up because of climate change. Now, this threat wasn't just some abstract idea. A company with deep ties to the Chinese government was already the main partner to develop the Havana Field mine, one of the world's biggest deposits of the exact heavy rare earths that China already has a near monopoly on. So from Washington's point of view, a critical strategic asset was about to fall directly into a rival's hands. The clock was ticking. But the minerals are only part of the story. The real prize here is geopolitical. Think about Israel's Iron Dome. It's designed for short-range rockets. The proposed Golden Dome is a strategic shield. It's designed to intercept ICBMs and hypersonic missiles from Russia and China, and the shortest flight path for those weapons is right over the North Pole. Greenland is the only piece of land perfectly positioned to host the sensors and interceptors needed to shoot them down. And that's when you see the whole picture. It's a classic pincer movement. You secure the hemisphere's oil supply in the south, and then you secure its critical minerals and strategic high ground in the north. Two totally separate operations, but both driven by one single overriding goal: total hemispheric dominance. But, as you can probably guess, this kind of unilateral strategy, this whole idea of securing America's backyard, it came at a staggering diplomatic cost. In fact, it created the most severe crisis in the entire history of the NATO alliance. So when Denmark, pretty predictably, rejected the offer, the U.S. didn't even try to negotiate. It just immediately shifted from persuasion to coercion. They accused their own allies of freeloading on American protection and then, bam, slapped punitive tariffs on 8 of them, including Germany, France, and the UK. The shock and outrage from European leaders was immediate. They saw the U.S. basically weaponizing trade to try and extort territory from a fellow NATO member. And they didn't mince words. The EU Commission president called it what it was: blackmail. And this was not an empty threat. The announcement had an immediate and very painful economic impact. You saw stock prices for Europe's auto giants, the very heart of the German economy, just plummet. Billions in value were just vaporized basically overnight. So let's just zoom out for a second. What kind of precedent does this incredibly aggressive American posture set for the rest of the world? And how did everyone else react? Well, America's main rivals had completely different reactions. Russia basically watched with a kind of cynical delight, seeing the U.S. actions as a green light for its own sphere of influence in places like Eastern Europe. China, on the other hand, was hit with a strategic shock. The U.S. had just shown that it was willing and able to basically decapitate a Chinese partner regime and cut off a vital resource flow. It was a major wake-up call for Beijing. What these events really signal is a shift into a new era of what you could call new mercantilism. It's a worldview that pretty much rejects the old, rules-based international order in favor of a raw competition for physical assets. In this new world, alliances are transactional, and power is measured by what you own, plain and simple. Ultimately, this whole strategy is really a grand bargain. The goal is to build a fortress America, a continent-sized power that's totally self-sufficient in energy, basically invulnerable to attack, and dominant over the resources of the future. But the price for building that fortress? It's the trust. The very trust that has held the Western alliance together for the last 80 years. Which leaves us with one final, and again, pretty unsettling question. Have we just moved on from the whole era of globalization and alliances? Is this really just a return to the raw 19th century game of great power politics, just dressed up with new technology and new justifications? A new game, maybe, but one with very, very old rules.